If you are wondering where New Zealand is going in 2025, here's an answer.
This government has roared out of the blocks with a massive focus on going for economic growth to make Kiwis better off.
And one of the ways to do it, says the PM, wealthy foreign investors. Why do we want them?
They bring money.
But it seems New Zealand has, for ages, had a bad rep.
We have garnered a reputation over quite a long period as being very restrictive.
Changes are underway, but should that include making it easier for foreign investors to buy Kiwi houses? Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd.
If we keep saying no, I'm telling you, we'll keep going nowhere.
From a culture of no to one of yes.
We need a lot less no, and we need a lot more yes.
And that means yes to more foreign investment. So on this episode, we talk to a UK-based finance fund on why it's putting $145 million into New Zealand. We ask whether we should copy what other countries like Ireland and Singapore do, and revisit that political hot potato, the foreign buyer's ban on houses. But first, why do we actually want these wealthy foreigners?
Well, there's really three things they do. The first is they bring money, and that's always welcome in our sector. Very much welcome.
Lance Wiggs co-founded venture capital fund Punakaiki a decade ago. He now has over $100 million under management and targets migrant investors.
It's the second thing is the type of money they bring. They have a different risk appetite than their local investors. By definition, they have more funds available to invest. Almost always they have a very long time perspective, and they're doing this for reasons other than just making a short-term return or what have you. So they bring a different mandate that sometimes can be very suited to direct investment into companies or investment into venture capital funds.
And that it's long-term generally, a long-term horizon, investment horizon.
Sometimes it depends sometimes on where they're from, but the way the program's set up is that it actually wants them to be long-term investors. Yeah. It's not useful to New Zealand if they're short-term.
So,
the third thing is obviously
third one, yes.
They're people. They're with vastly different experiences, many of whom are highly relevant to people in New Zealand and in the land here. Some of them get quite excited about it, no matter which program they come on, and they might invest more money in New Zealand and also help companies directly and also with connections and so on overseas.
New Zealand has wooed them before with the so-called golden visas, but the investors were not forced to put money into productive assets like companies. That was changed under Labour in 2022. And 2 years on, the current Active Investor Plus visa has seen 35 applications approved and $350 million promised. But so far, only $60 million of that has been invested directly into managed funds, shares and actual companies. Has that really worked, that revamp, in your experience?
There's a yes and a no. So in the early days, and I'm not sure what it's like now, but we were told by NZTE that the ramp up was faster than the previous program. Right. So there's always a learning curve here. There needed to be some tweaks, but fundamentally there were 3 or 4 flaws with the program that needed to be amended, tweaked.
Right.
And so one of the, such as being able to buy a residence. There's a very high net worth people. They've been asked to come and live here as part of the requirements for the visa, and yet they have to rent. And so there could be an angle there to help them into very high-end property.
So just on that, has that been a barrier? Because under the sort of existing ones, they have to sort of serve out a period of time before they can become residents, and it's like 3 or 4 years or something, isn't it? So and it's only then that they could become a resident and then buy property.
Yeah, I believe it's been a barrier for some people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it has. Yes, the old foreign house buyer question. National, as we know, tried to make it easier by lifting the current ban to help pay for tax cuts.
It will encourage more people to come to New Zealand and invest in our businesses.
Coalition partner New Zealand First, of course, said no.
We had certainly seen a pickup in inquiry leading up to that election in 2023. So noticeable lift in inquiry and traffic to our website from offshore.
Based out of Queenstown, Mark Harris heads New Zealand Sotheby's International Realty.
This is why we find the best homes New Zealand has to offer for those discerning enough to seek them.
Its focus, high net worth individuals.
And then, of course, it didn't happen. I wouldn't say it fell off a cliff, but it went back to a normal pattern from that point on. Once it was ceased.
Right. What would you describe as a normal pattern?
Well, regular inquiry from all around the world. Obviously with the brand we've got a network globally, and probably weekly we're fielding serious inquiry from high net worths around the world, looking to invest here, move here, etc. And it's just a shame we can't execute with them other than Australians and Singaporeans.
Yeah. So there is demand there, though. There's
a lot of demand there, yeah. We've noticed it pick up quite a lot in the last 3 to 6 months, actually. In fact, looking at our web traffic, we're up 104% year on year from the US, and I think over 140% from Singapore. So it's interesting to see that web traffic picking up dramatically from overseas in the last 3 to 6 months.
Right. Do you have any reason behind that?
Well, I think probably there's reasons within New Zealand why they're looking at the moment. Maybe there's a matter of us getting our own house in order a little bit, and also a bit of geopolitical activity going on around the world, and the election in the US, etc. So we find that when these sorts of events occur, there is a bit of a spike in offshore interest from around the world.
Have you been able to satisfy any of that demand recently? I mean, are you actually selling high net worth individuals from overseas any kind of property?
Well, the majority of the overseas people buying here are still Australians, and that market's continued to grow and will continue to grow. But definitely there's been a pickup in interest from the US, but we just can't, unless they've gone through the residency path and they've got their New Zealand residency, you just cannot sell them a residential property in New Zealand unless they're Singaporean or Australian. So, it's a little tight at the moment.
Okay. But there is this so-called golden visa. This is the Active Investors Plus visa, where if someone does come into the country and gets that kind of visa, they have to invest a certain amount over a certain period of time, and then they can get residency and are able to buy. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, we've had clients going through that process, and obviously it takes some time. They have to be here for 183 days of a 12-month period, which is hard for if you've got a wealthy individual from the US, let's say, who's a serious business person, and then to go through that process and spend that amount of time here and move their the whole portfolio to New Zealand. It's it's a big thing to ask of them to do, and it becomes complicated because 183 days for someone like that can be hard to do. We had a situation where one was close to 183 days and they had to leave for a sick child, and when they came back, they were told they needed to start the process again. So it is complicated at the moment.
Right. Is that cited to you as an actual barrier to people not going through with this?
Yeah, regularly. Yeah, it is regularly. And then they end up, flying up to Australia and having a look at the process there, etc. So yeah, it would be good if it was a lot simpler and easier for them to purchase a home here, even if it had a hurdle of $4 or $5 million, or a bit of a filter there. We need to simplify it to attract these sort of people into the country, I think.
Have you had experience of clients that are coming here and then saying no, Australia's easier, or going to another jurisdiction?
Yeah, we have. Multiple times.
There has been some direction from the government to simplify some of the consents for overseas investment and things like that. So there is some movement on that. But there's also the idea that they may revamp the Active Investors Plus visa as well. And at the same time, the government's talking about going for growth and setting up Invest NZ as a sort of one-stop shop to get people to come here to invest. How would you describe those kinds of moves?
Yeah, again, I think anything that can be done to simplify that process. For example, the $15 million, investor category visa is in place, but it would make sense to me that if they're buying, or they're coming here to live, obviously, and bring their whole portfolio this way, and they wanted a home to buy, that if they were buying a residential property, let's say $5-6 million, that went towards that $15 million, investor category threshold. And then they could live in it while they were going through the process. It just seems to make sense.
Right, I see. So the house asset would be part of the overall $50 million cap.
Potentially, yeah. I think that would be one thing that would, help, entice those sorts of people here. And, the country needs investment at the moment, and of helping them buy a home here that they can come and use and, enjoy the lifestyle and benefits of New Zealand. Also encourages them to invest in business and infrastructure and marinas and those sorts of things. Then I think, it needs to be seriously looked at.
Just finally, Mark, what do you say to the sort of, sometimes the pushback that is that we don't want our homes and our land owned by wealthy foreigners? Why do we need these people, I guess is the question.
Well, I think that you need to look at the state of the economy in the country, and just the requirement the country currently needs for investment. I just think that there's too many barriers there. The optics of a closed shop is not healthy for the New Zealand economy, and if it can be controlled via a hurdle, where there is a dollar hurdle for them to come in, and the filters remain in place, we're attracting the right sort of people. We just need it at the moment, and the clients that we deal with on a regular basis are great people who want to get involved in local community, invest in local business. There's many examples of it around New Zealand, particularly Southern Lakes, where people end up being employed, business expands. It helps the local economy, and I struggle to see the negative of it.
Mark Harris used a phrase there, the optics of a closed shop. That, apparently, is how New Zealand has been perceived. Is it still?
I think we have garnered a reputation over quite a long period as being very restrictive in terms of our overseas investment regime.
Glenn Shewan is a partner at Bell Gully Law, specialising in overseas investment law.
Particularly sort of 5 to 10 years ago, we were a real outlier amongst other countries in terms of the restrictions that we put on foreign investors. In particular, the nature of the regime in what it required of investors, but also just the uncertain and very long timeframes. I think over recent years that has begun to change. We saw sort of in the early 2020s some reforms. They introduced mandatory timeframes. And then more recently, obviously, we've seen the ministerial directives from this government, which have really slashed the timeframes and made it much easier to invest. So I think we are seeing the perceptions change for foreign investors. It's just taking a little bit longer to see that come through. Okay,
so we've got this political push now, the going for growth as described by the Prime Minister. And part of that is establishing a new agency called Invest New Zealand or Invest NZ. Not a lot of detail yet, but do you have an understanding of what they're trying to do with it?
Yeah, I think it is just one part of the puzzle overall. So I think some of those regulatory changes are probably going to be more compelling. The slashing of the timeframes, the impending further review of the Overseas Investment Act. But if you take the government's announcements, what they're really trying to do is get a one-stop shop for overseas investors and have that agency have a sole focus on inbound investment rather than having it tied up with other aspects of trade or exports from New Zealand.
Sole focus, yeah.
It's a sole focus. And I think they're aimed at driving growth in high potential sectors. They're looking at making it easier and more streamlined to invest in new and existing businesses, looking at growing R&D here, and looking at getting more skilled professionals into the industries.
Often in the discourse around foreign investment and attracting that, people reference and governments reference what Ireland has done and Singapore have done. Is there a chance that we're trying to, or should we be modelling ourselves on that?
Yeah, these agencies have both been around for a very long time. I think Ireland's agency traces its roots back to 1949, so 75 years of business. So it will take a lot of catching up. There's also a lot of resource behind these agencies. I think each of them has at least 20 offices around the world. And again, their sole focus is on driving that inbound investment rather than any other sort of more extraneous focus. So I think they're useful models to look at, but as I say, it's just one part of the overall puzzle, I think, to make New Zealand a more attractive destination.
I don't know whether you can talk about this because I know you're not a tax specialist, but those foreign, also the Ireland example and the Singapore example, I mean, they have, it's all about low corporate tax rates and a lot of R&D tax rates and those kinds of things. Do you come across that as a barrier when you're talking to people?
Yeah, as you say, it's not my particular area of expertise, but I do think this is only one part of the puzzle. Invest New Zealand, as I say, There's immigration law, there's tax law, there's the broader regulatory settings in our economy, and there's overseas investment law. The government has made strides on an overseas investment law. They're trying to make that easier, and I think that is working. And I think there's some optimism based on some of the signals coming out of government that there might be some changes coming to immigration and tax rules for skilled migrants, but the detail hasn't come out yet.
In terms of how New Zealand is going to be perceived of being open for business for the investors from the rest of the world, are you seeing that it is working? Is there more interest? Are these changes to consents and this Invest NZ signal going to encourage that?
Yeah, we have conversations with investors and particularly their legal advisors and their financial advisors almost every day.
Yeah.
And the perception really has started to change. It's actually been quite pleasing as other regimes have possibly become more restrictive. There's more foreign direct investment regimes have sprung up all around the world. For us to have a good news story and say, well, ours is actually, despite having a reputation for being more difficult, is actually getting much easier as we go. And the OIO has really followed through on those directives. The timeframes are coming down substantially, and that's garnering a lot of positive feedback from investors. So I think it is starting to work.
Is it working? Well, let's ask an overseas investor. Monty Cleantech is a UK-based financier with a mission to decarbonise transport. Last year, it committed $145 million into Kiwi startup Ocean Flyer, led by Shah Aslam. Ocean Flyer is planning to buy and operate ocean gliders. These are electric-powered seaplanes which fly just above the surface of the water at 300 kilometres an hour. What brought you to New Zealand? Was it just Ocean Flyer?
It was predominantly Ocean Flyer in the beginning, absolutely.
Tim Eyre is the Chief Operating Officer.
We were lucky enough to meet the team at Ocean Flyer in March 2023. And I think for us, the product in the Sea Glider had always been on the radar and something we were interested to look at financing.
So, in context, $145 million deal with them, is that big? Is that small for you guys?
I'd say it's big for now, but I think we have big ambitions with Ocean Flyer, with Shah, to take this, to start in New Zealand, to really grow and develop the market here, and then to take that global, hopefully. I think the key thing, Simon, that we look at with this technology is putting something in the water, operating it, having that technical and operational experience, and then using that to grow the market and take it international, hopefully.
So New Zealand is the test case for this?
You could call it the test case, but I think it's, it has the opportunity in New Zealand to be the potentially the world leader in this technology.
New Zealand as an ecosystem to invest in.
Yes.
How did you find that?
I think we were fortunate to have met Shah when we did, and to really get to understand the market through him and the team at Ocean Flyer. And I think that's very important for us from a financing perspective. Having a local partner who has that knowledge and knows the right regulatory environment and the government environment is very important.
What about the regulatory environment in terms of overseas capital and finance coming into New Zealand? Did you strike barriers? Did you have any sort of preconceived ideas that New Zealand was a hard place to do business with?
No, everyone's been very welcoming so far, Simon. So not a hard place to do business at all in our expertise. I mean, when we think about financing clean transportation, a big part of that clearly is the asset, and having comfort around the asset, useful life, valuations, residual values, that sort of thing. The other big part clearly is the team and the operations.
Were there any other barriers, like from the Overseas Investment Office, or tax barriers or anything like that Monty Cleantech came across? Nothing
of a sort of that scale of challenge. No.
Right. Okay.
I have to say it's been a pretty seamless process so far, which is good. And I think for us, when we think about new technology, the easier it is to do business and break down some of those barriers, the better. And I think, to be honest, most of from the corporate finance side has been pretty smooth.
I mean, you are global as a company. I think you've done deals with about $25 billion worth of assets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we've been in the aviation and transportation space for close to 25 years. Yeah. And over the past 15 years specifically, we've focused on this more regional transportation space across both aviation and maritime.
So have you found doing business around the world, and how does New Zealand compare, I guess is the question?
Given that we operate in pretty much every region of the world, I'd say New Zealand's been quite easy for us, to be honest. Where a lot of these aircraft are used, are places like Eastern Africa, Central and South America, parts of Asia Pacific, where actually the ease of doing business is, well, I wouldn't call it ease of doing business at all. You do run into some quite complex challenges with the regulatory environment, with the government. Yep. Even from an operator perspective, and things like international cross-border payments and taxation and things like that can pose quite significant challenges. Yeah. And so far we've found all of that to be relatively simple in comparison here. So.
Of course, Monty Cleantech is not an individual migrant investor, but it does fit into that plan of foreign money helping a Kiwi company go for growth. We'll wait for more details about the new one-stop shop Invest New Zealand, and there are changes to be announced soon to the Active Investor Plus visa. The last word goes to Lance Wiggs from Punakaiki, who actively woos those migrant investors.
They're good people making smart investments, and helping the companies and the funds. So it's definitely something there. And when they get here, they connect with the network here as well and help everybody here.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a fantastic program.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Links to any social media clips used are in the description. Thanks to content producers Joseph Hisayasu and Jack Latham. And for early access to new episodes, subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Up next, she was the youngest CEO of a KiwiSaver fund. Now she's back to coach the next wave. Who is it? I'm Simon Shepherd, and we'll tell you next week.